Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to Podcast 126 for August 10th, 2011. My guest today, I'm very excited to have on Bob Lutz. He's the author of the book, Car Guys versus Bean Counters, The Battle for the Soul of American Business. Now, he retired in late 2010 as the vice chairman of General Motors, and during his 47-year career in the auto industry, Bob worked for GM, Ford, BMW, and Chrysler, and he's a legend in the Detroit area where I grew up. Now, in this podcast, we'll discuss Bob's new book, his thoughts on designing products that create value and excitement for customers, as well as some of his thoughts on leadership. Now, Bob's a car guy and a designer through and through, so a lot of what he says isn't classic lean thinking, if you will, but I think it's interesting and thought-provoking, and I think you'll find a lot of parallels, or at least a lot to talk about. So if you go to the blog post for this episode at leanblog.org/126, you can talk about this with other listeners. You can also download a transcript, and you can download a version of the transcript that has some of my comments embedded, things that I've thought about and reflected upon and reacted to from Bob Lutz's comments. So I want to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back for more podcasts. You can subscribe at leanpodcast.org. Well, our guest again is Bob Lutz, talking about his new book, Car Guys versus Bean Counters. Now, Mr. Lutz, you're a car guy extraordinaire, and you've been critical of MBA education and mindset. So I was wondering if you could describe what is a bean counter, and why is it that it's not just accountants who can become bean counters, unfortunately?
Yeah, bean counters is not so much a profession in that I know many finance people who are extremely skilled at finding value in the product and pushing that. But the bean counter mindset is a person who can be in any field. Sometimes you encounter him in engineering, who absolutely want to quantify everything, want to go for cost minimization on everything, and who understand cost and cost reduction, but they do not understand value creation in terms of making a superior product or offering a superior service that's going to delight customers, create good word of mouth, and have the customers buying again.
So I've heard you talk before that the customer's not always right. Besides relying on your gut and decades of experience, how can people go about determining what's of value, what's really going to delight and excite customers?
Well, I think the best way is, the way we do it in the car business is we do a full-scale model of the future car, and we test it with respondents against competition with all of the cars disguised so they can't tell what brand it is, because the minute they know what brand it is, they vote by brand instead of by how well they like the car. And that's another reason why in research techniques, the reason I say the customer isn't always right is because what the customer verbalizes as his or her desires are often the socially responsible or the socially acceptable reasons, but they don't get at the hidden purchase motivation. For instance, if you were to ask men, how important to you is it to have a $10,000 wristwatch? Most guys will say, that's not important at all. Wristwatches are here to tell time. A $30 Timex will do just as well. And, you believe that at your peril. The same is true with cars. If you ask people this tired old question, when it comes to cars, what is important to you? Is it styling, safety, convenience, etc.? The average respondent will say, styling is not important, performance is not important. I want a solid, reliable car with plenty of room for my family. In other words, they're always giving you rational reasons. But humans aren't rational beings, and when inside themselves there is this boiling pot of emotion and lust, and inevitably they'll go out and buy a good-looking car. That's why I say that you have to understand the hidden motivations of customers or find research techniques to get at those.
Now, I saw you give a talk at Harvard Business School in the late 90s. I was an MIT student at the time. You were probably talking to a lot of budding bean counters. And I think I recall you talking about a goal in design being to create products that people really love or really hate, that it was okay to have products that were hated by some instead of,
well, sure,
being just okay.
Here's what happens, and this is typical of the bean counter mentality, and I've seen perfectly good automobile proposals wrecked dozens of times by trying to get rid of dissatisfiers. In other words, they will try to get rid of, based on research, they'll try to get rid of every controversial element on the car. And this is what I call putting it through the blanderizer. And at the end of the day, the car comes out totally neutral, has no character, doesn't displease anybody, but also doesn't please anybody. So you're far better off, since human beings are wildly diverse in their tastes and desires, and whether they're conservative, stylistically conservative or stylistically progressive, you have to do a very bold design that has an emotional impact. And then if you get a situation where 50% of people absolutely love it and 50% hate it, that's ideal. That's far better than 80% of people saying, yeah, it's okay. Because if 80% say it's okay, it means it's everybody's second choice. And nowadays, nobody buys second choices anymore. They don't have to.
So maybe if we can shift a little bit from design to management principles. One question I guess I would ask, though, about the auto industry first. Where would the big three be today if they had been run more by the car guys? And do you think there's any hope of that balance shifting in the future toward the car guys?
Well, I think it has shifted towards the car guys at all three of the Detroit companies, and it's especially manifest in General Motors and Chrysler if you look at the cars that they're putting out. I mean, these cars are just done exquisitely well. They're well designed. They have beautiful, rich interiors, and so forth. Manufacturing was never really shortchanged that much because manufacturing is a rational activity. You put in a certain amount of capital and labor, you build a certain plant, et cetera, you can calculate your costs of that plant down to the labor minute, and you've got a full manufacturing cost of every unit made in that plant. So manufacturing is a rational activity. It contains very little emotion, and therefore the bean counter mentality in optimizing manufacturing actually works pretty well. And I would say American manufacturing, certainly in the automobile business, American manufacturing today, I will put up against anybody in the world. German, Korean, Japanese, all the big three plants today are wonderful examples of lean manufacturing, just-in-time, hand-on cords, et cetera, no in-process inventory, error-proofing on the line, et cetera. I mean, everything is there. The only reason why any country would still have a manufacturing advantage over the United States would be purely due to exchange rates or labor costs.
Mm-hmm. Now, shifting to the management topics here, I saw an interview you did with the Wall Street Journal where you were critical of what you called the total quality approach to management, and you were advocating for autocratic CEOs. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I did have a problem with the TQM consultants in the 90s, where they descended on all companies and we went through these elaborate off-site deals that lasted 5 days, and everybody held hands, and that's when all the posters went up saying, well, listen to everyone with respect. There is no such thing as a bad idea. And, I mean, that is unmitigated hogwash. Of course there's such a thing as a bad idea. And the idea that we should all be that it should be sort of a democratic, pleasant, wonderful chaos in a company where everybody discusses endlessly and nobody ever says, okay, look, we've discussed this enough. We've got a decision to make, and we're going to go with B and not A. Well, then all of the people who were in favor of A are disappointed, but at least you've got a decision. And speed is of the essence. It's better to make a marginal decision on time than to make a perfect decision too late. And I've just seen too much of a vacillation, endless discussion. Well, we didn't come to agreement on that. Let's meet again next week and discuss it again. And, of course, nobody ever changes their mind. And if the boss doesn't step in and say, we have discussed this enough, we've got to make a decision, and here's how we're going to go. So there is, I think the United States industrially went too far in what I call participative decision-making, where the boss is afraid to step in and make the decision, and he's hoping the team will sort it out among themselves. I'll tell you, that doesn't work. It's about like a family with 9 kids all milling around the house, and the parents say, well, you know, they'll sort it out. They'll probably set the table at some point and cook the food. Unless mom and dad set the direction, no, it's going to be chaos. And I don't like working for autocratic bosses, and I don't think I was one. And I was when I had to be, but I was reluctant to step in and say, do it my way, because it's not the way you like to lead. But if you look at companies that are run by super autocrats like Volkswagen under Winterkorn and before Winterkorn, Ferdinand Piëch, where it was literally, you do as I say, my way or the highway, and he would not only tell them how to do it, he would tell them what to do. A totally autocratic system where everybody lived in fear, and I would hate to work for a company like that, and I know that a fear-driven environment is not a pleasant one, but Volkswagen Audi today is the most successful car company in the world, and they're on the cusp of becoming the world's largest automobile company, run by total autocrats.
Mm-hmm. Now, my experience, and when I worked at General Motors in the mid-'90s, we had a plant manager who was one of the first GM people sent to work at NUMMI out in California, and I think that leadership style is not completely autocratic. It's certainly not completely participative. I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on lessons learned from GM's partnership with Toyota at NUMMI in terms of finding that balance in the management style.
Yeah, I think in general the study of Japanese management techniques or Japanese leadership techniques as observed during the 70s and 80s really helped American leadership a lot. Because we kind of didn't have a leadership style, or the leadership style we had in the United States was often too autocratic, or bosses being so proud of having achieved their position, and since they had been mistreated when they were underlings, they said, well, now that I'm on top of the heap, I'm going to treat the people the way I was treated, make them jump, demean people, tear them down in meetings and so forth. That was all bad stuff. And very valuable lessons were learned from NUMMI, and Chrysler got the same lessons from Mitsubishi and Ford from Mazda. So I think what we now have is a successful blend of the good parts of the Japanese consensus system and the participative system, and I think we're learning to re-achieve the balance, because I think we went way too far the other way. It's the usual pendulum reaction. And I think we're coming back to the middle now, where people are empowered, but they understand who the boss is, they understand they're under time pressure, they understand they've got to come to a decision, and if they don't, the boss is going to make it for them. That is certainly the way GM is being run right now, and I think it's the right balance.
Yeah, and one other question on balance. In the book, I thought it was interesting where you talked about your last stint at GM, trying to find in your own leadership style the balance between teaching and telling. Can you share a thought on that?
Well, I like to teach rather than tell, because telling is, I think, the lazy man's way. You just say, look, I don't have time to explain it to you. Do it this way. I think that way people will accept it, but they'll accept it grudgingly, and there's a certain amount of resentment. But if you say, look, based on my experience and on similar situations I viewed in the past, if we did it your way, here's what I see happening. I've not only observed this once, I've observed it 3 times in my career, and that's why I'm reluctant to say yes to your proposal, because my experience tells me it doesn't work. And you actually cite the examples. Well, that takes a little longer, but hopefully the individual has learned a little something, and at least he or she understands why you decided against their proposal. So if the time is available, and let's face it, it usually is, I always like to explain. The more unpopular the decision, the more I go out of my way to try to explain it.
And Mr. Lutz, maybe just one last question on the topic of car guys versus bean counters. In the book, you talk about this a little bit. If you can share some thoughts on the idea of the car guy being applicable in other industries. You use Steve Jobs as a positive example of this. Would you think, for example, should hospitals run by doctors? Do you think they're the equivalent?
Not necessarily. See, now you could argue that General Motors and Ford right now are 2 successfully run car companies that are, and even Chrysler, not run by what I would call car fanatics or product people. But it's not so much that they have to be subject experts in the product or service that they're putting out. It's that they have to be passionately committed to the excellence of the product or service that they are producing. And so if I'm not sure it would work to have hospitals run by doctors, because doctors sometimes are notoriously poor administrators. So I see nothing wrong with having professional administration running a hospital, provided that hospital administrator is passionate about listening to the doctors who serve on the staff, and is passionately committed to providing the best healthcare experience for the hospital customers that is possible, as opposed to, as many do, focusing all their time on where can we cut costs, where can we reduce receptionism, whose phone lines can we take away, can we go from 5 ambulances to 4, spending all their time on cost optimization and hoping that they can somehow get away with it without the customers noticing. So it's more a mentality thing than it is being a subject expert.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. Again, our guest has been Bob Lutz. Thanks for talking, sharing your reflections and talking about your new book, Car Guys versus Bean Counters. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I hope others will go out and check it out.
It shouldn't take you too long to read. It's an easy read. You get through it in about 3 hours.
Yeah. I got through a good chunk of it last night, and really a pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
Okay, thanks very much. Good talking to you, too.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.